Welcome to Jordan. If you're joining me for the first time, hi, I'm Caroline, and to get you all caught up, I've explored some of Jordan's well-known attractions, from mudding up and floating around in the Dead Sea, going for an epic hike in Petra, seeing the treasury lit up at night, and gawping at it at the view from above. Time has been spent relaxing at the Red Sea and checking out some unusual sights on a snorkel trip. I've also spent a couple of nights in the Wadi Rum desert learning how to build a fire, brew a traditional Bedouin tea, whilst our guide has cooked us fresh lunches to keep us sustained for adventures such as hiking Jabal al-Hash, clambering up rock faces, sand dunes, walking through canyons, across rock arches, and did I mention the sunsets? Today, however, we've headed north, very north, and the day is going to be spent getting my geek on as I explore the ancient Greco-Roman city of Jerash. Good morning and welcome to Jerash, or otherwise known as Geraza back in the Roman times. This is one of the largest Roman ruin sites outside of Italy, and today we've come on up here to explore and find out exactly what's been left behind. The modern day entrance into Jerash is through Hadrian's Arch. It stands at 13 metres tall and would have originally had 3 wooden doors under each of the 3 arches. Looking through the main one, you've got beautiful vistas over the rolling hills, and I'm sure that the Roman architects would have had that in their vision when originally designing it. It was named Hadrian's Arch to celebrate the emperor visiting in 129 to 130 AD, and originally the plan was that this would have become the main entrance into Jerash as the town expanded, but unfortunately that never happened. Today, however, it is the modern day entrance. No sooner have we passed through Hadrian's Arch, we've got into this, which is the Hippodrome. Back in its heyday, it could have seated 15,000 spectators, and they would have come here to watch things like athletics, chariot racing. I picture like the Hunger Games, and Katniss and Petra are riding on those chariots, and you've got the roaring crowds cheering them on. And they've been able to reconstruct a tiny part of the bleachers just to give a bit of an idea as to maybe what this space would have been like. Now, normally when I've been lucky enough to go to other Roman sites over in Italy, it's been on school trips, and usually when we get to an area such as the Hippodrome here, we get all of our students to line up and we get them to all race the 100 metres. But given that we don't have a bunch of teenagers to do this for us, I think Andy and I should have a race. How does that sound?
No.
Why not?
Veto.
Why?
Bye.
I've managed to convince Andy otherwise, so we are going to have a quick race, maybe not quite 100 metres, maybe like 20, 25 metres, but let's make it go. So, shall we leave our bags to run?
Sure.
So maybe as far as like, not this first boulder wall, but like the end of the second one. How does that sound?
Sure.
Okay, so if I do a starting line.
That's not straight.
This is now straight. This is a bit more fair.
Right, you ready?
Do you want to count us in?
3, 2, 1, go.
What?
It's too hot. Bye. Crazy woman.
The arches to the south of the Hippodrome mark where the horses would have started for the chariot racing, and I'm guessing there would have been some kind of barrier that would have been dropped for the horses to be able to start at the same time. By the 4th century, this Hippodrome was then converted a little bit more into an amphitheatre at the north end of it, and the gladiator fights then began around that time, which I know I was saying earlier about the chariot racing and thinking about the Hunger Games, but I think especially when it comes to gladiator fighting, Hunger Games is obviously where it got a lot of inspiration from. The other end, the southern end, that however kind of fell into disuse, disarray, and apparently some squatters moved in and had pottery workshops, and when archaeologists have come in, it's pottery that they found at that southern end of this hippodrome. I've just wandered through the South Gate, which has incredible similarities to the Hadrian's Arch. It's predicted that that might have been a prototype that they built first to see how it looked and then be able to improve upon it to make it all that much more spectacular when the Hadrian's Arch was actually created, so that the emperor would have been even more blown away by it. The Romans, they just seem to, I don't know, be very extravagant in the way in which they went about doing things. The one nice thing about the South Gate, however, is that it's still got those wooden gates in the arches. The next space that we've been brought into is the Oval Plaza, and I have to say that I feel a little bit frustrated standing in here because the information that we've been given on our map and the permanent signs that are dotted around the site don't give an awful lot of information as to what went on in this space. What we do know is that we've got the Cardo behind me, and that street couldn't quite link with the sanctuary of Zeus, and so they used this almost like to widen the street to be able to cause a link between the two. They've also talked about how you've got all of these Ionic columns around the outside of it, which obviously was Greek influenced, and the paving slabs that I'm currently stood on, they don't believe that they were added at the same time as those columns. They think that they came probably about 2 centuries later, but nowhere is it letting us know what this space was used for. And I guess in modern day times, a really big open plaza such as this will be a hubbub of things like market stalls or shops. People would gather here. We might even have, I don't know, people like standing up to, preach about certain things, and there's just nothing to indicate whatever happened here in history. And I don't know if that's just because they've not been able to find anything. If you're watching this and you know a lot more about, the classics than what I do, and you're thinking, I know exactly what went on in this plaza, please do leave a comment down below letting me know, and hopefully anyone else who's watching this wondering the same thing. Next stop is in the South Theatre. There's 3 theatres in Jerash in total. This is the oldest, having been built between the years of 80 and 96 AD, and it's also the largest of the 3, being able to seat more than 3,000 spectators. The lower section of the seating has been reconstructed, which has allowed for us to be able to get up to this height. And apparently some of the seats have still got some of the old Greek inscriptions on them, so that people knew when purchasing tickets which seat they needed to sit at. It also has the amazing acoustics that we've come to expect from Roman theatres. So in the orchestra section, which is sunken down, not on the raised section of the stage, if I was to go into the corner of it and to speak in a normal voice without raising it, anywhere else within the seated area, I would be able to be heard. The only issue with that is that unfortunately it's very busy, there's a lot of people, and I believe that you would need silence from everyone else in order for that to be able to work. One of the other things that I love about this theatre is just how ornate and beautiful the backdrop to the stage is, and it's got those Corinthian columns too. We've now made our way along to the Temple of Zeus, and this temple is, believe it or not, larger than Artemis's temple, even though Artemis was the god of the city of Jerash. Construction on this started about 15 years later than what the construction of Artemis's temple was. Later on in history, people came along and deconstructed this temple in order to be able to take the stonework to build churches, which just seems crazy that you would dismantle it, but obviously people have come along and they've reconstructed it, and you've got the beautiful Corinthian columns and then looking down onto that plaza that we were at a little bit earlier on. We've come down off the hill from the Temple of Zeus, and we've made it now onto the Cardo. We've had to cross that plaza that we were on much earlier on, and what I think is quite interesting is that this Cardo links both the plaza and also the North Gate. Now the plaza earlier, I couldn't help but notice, had those Ionic columns, but as soon as we've come onto the Cardo, these are Corinthian columns. I was reading that this street has changed and morphed as and when the city itself changed and morphed, and we had shops that lined along both both sides, sharing walls with one another. There was also a Roman sewerage system, which they think was probably created around 3 AD. As well as that, I'm going to look very carefully because from the constant use of chariots going up and down this, you're supposed to be able to see real grooves within this rock. And speaking of the rock that we're walking on, it turns out that some of this came from that Temple of Zeus. The next place that we've come to is Artemis's Temple. Its construction never finished. It was supposed to have had a total of 32 columns, but it only got as far as building 12. There are vaults underneath what it sits on, but today we don't really understand what those vaults were for. What we do know is that there were 2 staircases, one that took people down into those vaults, and then another one that would take people up on top of the temple, and they expect that there was probably an altar up there. I was told that if you stand smack bang in the centre, you can just talk at normal volume and absolutely anyone and everyone who was sat in the theatre rows would be able to hear what I was saying. I did try it, but unfortunately there was an awful lot of noise from other people, whereas here it's super quiet, so I figured let's try it in here. And obviously it's got exactly the same Roman acoustic design because I can hear the echo coming back. I'm hoping that despite the camera being on the very top row of this first section, that it can pick up exactly what I'm saying. Fountains were common features in Roman cities, and Jerash was of no exception. The one behind me had marble on the lower levels, and then higher up on the fountain you had plasterwork that had beautiful paintings. There were 7 carved lions' heads, and water would spout out of them. They would then cascade off of that fountain into then the sewers that ran underneath the Cardo. This is a really small section within Jerash's site that explains these were houses. Families lived here in these dwellings. What it's really made me start to wonder is, if we've got these great large areas where people could gather, such as the Roman theatre, that could house thousands of people, where did all of those people live? I understand that we've got some slight architectural areas off to the side of where the ruins are that we've walked through today, but it does make me wonder, was Jerash maybe a much larger site than what we are currently walking around today, and perhaps is modern day Jerash built on top of where all of the residents lived? Or is this a city that people would commute to? I personally don't think it was a commuting city. I don't think commuting was really much of a thing back then. I really do start to wonder if maybe Jerash was much, much bigger back in its heyday. The demise of Jerash could come down to a few contributing factors. There was an earthquake in 749 AD that destroyed a lot of the structures. So whilst people did try and stay on, and then there's been, in other points in history, people who've come along to try and make something out of this place, it never was quite in the heyday that it once was. When we also take into consideration the fact that one of the reasons why Jerash, or as it was known at the time, Geraza, flourished was because of the land trade route. So things like camel caravans similar to Petra were coming through this area, and the Romans were able to make money off of those coming and going. However, as time went on, there became more of a favouritism towards using sea trade, so putting goods on boats, which meant that cities like this were then not getting the money that they once did. If you've got a city that isn't getting as much money coming in and it's also been destroyed by an earthquake, a lot of people are going to give up and look elsewhere for a better life.